CD Projekt Red has been keeping things tight-lipped when it comes to Cyberpunk Orion, the highly anticipated sequel to Cyberpunk 2077. Aside from a codename for the game, a few job listings, and some vague goals about realism and ambition, we haven't really heard much about this game so far. But then, Mike Pondsmith, the man who literally created the Cyberpunk universe, casually dropped a pretty big detail about this upcoming title in the Cyberpunk series. The next game is going to include a second city, and not just any city. In his own words, he said it's one that feels like Chicago gone wrong. That one offhanded comment delivered during a panel at Digital Dragons 2025 has opened the floodgates for this game. Now fans are speculating, analyzing, and imagining what it means to step out of Night City and into a whole new urban setting. Now let's break it all down, what the new city could be, why it matters, and what else we've learned about the game that's shaping up to be one of the most ambitious sequels in gaming history. But before we get into it, if you enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all the latest Cyberpunk news. And if you're interested, consider becoming a member on the channel for early access on every video, members only content, your name in the credits, the ability to write in and have your comments featured, and access to the Discord community. So let's set the scene. Mike Pondsmith, the original creator of the Cyberpunk tabletop RPG game, was doing an interview at Digital Dragons 2025, one of Europe's biggest game development events. When asked about Cyberpunk Orion, he admitted he's not as involved this time around, but he still sees the scripts, chats with departments, and occasionally drops in to offer feedback on the game. Then came the moment. Pondsmith was talking about a conversation he had had recently with one of the environmental artists on the Orion team. He said, "There's another city that we visit," immediately adding after that he can't say any more than that, but of course he already had. He continued, describing the vibe of this mysterious location. "It doesn't feel like Blade Runner, it feels more like Chicago gone wrong." That's it, that's the line, and it might be the most important piece of information that we've gotten so far about Orion. But first things first, Night City isn't going anywhere. Pondsmith was very clear that it still exists and will be a major part of the sequel, but adding a second, equally developed city, that's a big leap forward for the series. In Cyberpunk 2077, Night City was pretty much the entire game. It was huge, dense, and dripping with style, but also there were parts of the map that felt kind of lonely. The Badlands were of course very sparse. There was no fast travel to other cities, no big narrative shift that pulled you to a new location, it was all just Night City or bust. And personally, I love Night City, and I can't wait to see what they do with a second location. And of course, Orion could be a bit different here. Having multiple cities opens the door to new gameplay structures. Think shifting allegiances, cross-city politics, and fast-paced missions that actually justify hopping on a high-speed rail or getting smuggled out of a corporate district. And of course, this also means players won't be strictly tethered to one flavor of dystopia. Night City is all neon and chrome. This new city might be smoke, grime, and broken glass. More post-apocalyptic, I guess. Now let's talk a bit about tone, because that Chicago gone wrong description for this new city does a lot of heavy lifting here. Pondsmith also made it clear, the new city doesn't feel like Blade Runner, which has become the shorthand for moody, rain-soaked, neon-lit dystopias. Instead, this city probably feels way more grounded, more rusted, and more of a brutal environment. It's Midwestern cyberpunk of some sorts, I guess. But picture it, skyscrapers half finished and abandoned, gang-controlled subway systems, and snow-covered alleyways with gunfire in the distance. Corrupt union bosses and warlords running around the neighborhood blocks could set the tone for this new city. Not shiny, not sleek. This is cyberpunk with a blunt instrument, not a scalpel. And that shift in tone could make Orion feel totally different from its predecessor, at least when you're visiting that new city. Night City of course was punk rock and synthwave. This new place, it might be industrial jazz and crackling radio static. When Mike Pondsmith described one of Cyberpunk Orion's two major cities as Chicago gone wrong, longtime fans of the tabletop games probably knew exactly what that meant, because in the Cyberpunk universe, Chicago isn't just a city, it's a tragedy. And I have to say, I'm not really familiar with the tabletop games, I've only played Cyberpunk 2077, and all of this info comes from the fandom wiki for the Cyberpunk series. Some of the initial information you see when visiting the wiki about Chicago in the Cyberpunk universe is that it's a city in the NUSA in the state of Illinois in the Midwest region, and has a population of approximately 8 million in the year 2020. And one of the quotes describing it says, "Looking at Chicago from outside the city in daylight is one of the most depressing sights in the world." In the 2013 and 2020 sourcebook, Chicago was a brutal example of how far civilization could fall. Already plagued by crime since the 1960s, the city was brought to its knees during the collapse. But what truly broke it was the 2012 bioplague, an accidental outbreak caused when an old government bioresearch facility beneath the University of Chicago known as Heartland was unknowingly unearthed. Contained within were deadly viral agents left over over from decades of secret biological warfare experiments, and the results were very catastrophic. Nearly 200,000 dead in a matter of months, the city quarantined and left to rot. By 2020, only about 10% of Chicago was considered habitable. The rest, a crumbling wasteland patrolled by nomads, gangs, and the desperate. Entire districts became no-go zones. The Loop, once the city's beating heart, was overtaken by decay. Below ground, a makeshift society called the Morlocks lit up the Emerald City, an underground maze bathed in green neon and filth. Above on the surface, some areas like Newtown and Old Town began rebuilding with help from the Megacorp Storm Technologies, but the scars remained. The city became infamous, almost mythic, a place where humanity's worst tendencies collided with technology's unchecked evolution. It's never fully forgotten. Even in Cyberpunk 2077, it's said that a transcontinental maglev line connects Night City and Chicago, suggesting that some semblance of order had returned to the city. But even then, Chicago remained darker, grittier, and rougher than its West Coast counterparts. So when Pondsmith says Orion will take us somewhere that feels like Chicago gone wrong, he's not just talking about aesthetic. He's talking about legacy, a city poised by its past, trying to rebuild but never quite escaping the rot. That's the Chicago we could be walking into if they're making that in Cyberpunk Orion, and if CD Projekt Red taps into that history, it could make for one of the richest, most haunting environments in the entire series. Let's be honest, Cyberpunk 2077 had a pretty rough launch back in 2020. The game overpromised, underdelivered at least initially, and burned a lot of goodwill from the company. But CD Projekt Red didn't abandon the game, they fixed it, and Phantom Liberty proved they could tell tight, emotional stories inside this cyberpunk world. And now with Orion, they have a chance to take all of that experience that they've gained up to this point and push forward. Introducing a second city, especially one that feels fundamentally different from Night City, is a smart way to do that. It shows growth. It tells players we're not just reusing old assets, we're building something a lot bigger. And of course they are moving over to Unreal Engine 5 away from their own Red engine, so a lot of this is going to be redone anyways. It also lets them expand on gameplay systems that didn't get enough time to shine in Cyberpunk 2077. Imagine gang wars playing out differently depending on what city you're in at the time, or cyberware restrictions that vary based on region. Or storylines that start in one city and erupt in another. And of course, it lets them show off this new technology that they're working with. Of course, I just mentioned this, but Orion is being built in Unreal Engine 5, not CDPR's Red engine that they've used for many years now. That means faster iteration, better crowd AI, and much more complex urban layouts. A Chicago gone wrong is the perfect playground for that kind of tech to flex. But it is important to note that there are at least some perceived issues with Unreal Engine 5. I know the stutter has been a huge problem in the Oblivion remaster, so hopefully it's kind of a development problem and CD Projekt Red can do some of their magic and make sure this game doesn't have a ton of issues on launch. And plus, this game is still many years away, so all of the kinks in Unreal Engine 5 could be worked out by then. My fingers are crossed. I need this game to launch in a great state. Development on Cyberpunk Orion is being led by CD Projekt Red North America, a relatively new arm of the studio that includes teams in Boston and Vancouver. That's important, because it speaks to another goal of theirs. They said they want to make the game feel more authentically American. Maybe that's for the good or bad, but only time will tell. The original Cyberpunk 2077 had its roots in a very European design mindset, which isn't a bad thing of course, but it didn't always capture the street-level American dystopia that the original tabletop game hinted at. But of course, some of those ideas really worked in Night City, and maybe they're wanting some different kind of design for this new Chicago Gone Wrong style city. But now with more North American devs on board and a Chicago Gone Wrong setting in play, Orion might finally feel like a true blend of Western Cyberpunk and CDPR's signature RPG flair. And of course, it's not just the setting that's evolving. CDPR has brought in veteran devs from Blizzard, Amazon Games, and Panic Button. Dan Hernberg, a production lead with experience in large-scale live service and action titles, is helping steer the ship. In other words, this is a team that knows what it's doing, and one that isn't trying to rush the sequel out the door. If you've been poking around CDPR's job listings, you may have seen one phrase pop up again and again: the most realistic crowds ever seen in a video game. That's not just marketing fluff, it tells you what kind of game Orion is probably aiming to be. In Cyberpunk 2077, one of the biggest complaints at launch was that the world didn't feel super reactive. NPCs were shallow and AI was pretty simplistic. You could walk into a packed market and not feel any tension or unpredictability. That's changing in Cyberpunk Orion. Of course, they did update Cyberpunk 2077 a lot from its original launch state and in terms of the NPC interactions, but hopefully Cyberpunk Orion takes it even further. CDPR seems to be pouring resources into building smarter, denser, more believable environments, crowds that don't just stand around but move with purpose. Civilians who remember your actions and enemies who respond dynamically depending on the district district, or the time of day. That might not sound super flashy, but when you combine it with multiple cities and varying urban types, you could get a world that actually breathes. And all of that, more than any cinematic trailer or big name cameo in the game, is what will make Orion stick the landing. As of 2025, Orion is still deep in development. CDPR has been clear that they're not rushing this one. After the lessons learned from Cyberpunk 2077, they're taking their time. We haven't seen gameplay, no trailers, just a few concept hints, some job listings, and this nugget from Pondsmith. Most analysts expect a release window somewhere between 2027 and 2029, but a release in 2030 is probably more likely, depending on how smoothly Unreal Engine 5 development goes and whether CDPR avoids the kind of crunch cycles that haunted them in the past. But let's be honest, after the past 5 years, or specifically how Cyberpunk 2077 originally launched back in 2020, would you rather have it fast or done right? I know what my answer is. So that's what we know. Cyberpunk Orion is coming. Night City will be back, but it won't be the only place we visit. There's supposedly a new city on the map, one that feels less like a neon dream and more like a collapsed American heartland. Chicago gone wrong, as Mike Pondsmith put it. That phrase does say a lot, of course, about tone, about direction, and about their ambitions for this new city. It overall pretty much means that this sequel won't be just more of the same. It'll be something riskier, rougher, maybe even more real for us to experience. And in a genre that's often obsessed with high-tech gloss, that kind of grit could be exactly what Cyberpunk needs next. We'll be watching closely, of course. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all the latest Cyberpunk news. And if you're looking for something else to watch, click one of the videos you're seeing on screen right now. I will see you there. Also, a huge thank you to all the amazing channel members.